Hello and welcome to Cricket8 Podcast. India defeating England by a massive margin of 68 runs and storming into the finals, setting up a date with South Africa. After, of course, making it to the finals of the ODI World Cup as well, India continuing with that consistency, unbeaten run, and now, of course, also facing South Africa, which is on a little unbeaten run of its own. And to talk more about this game and so much more about this World Cup, we've got Jared Kimber. Jared, you didn't expect it to be so easy, did you?
No, I thought the main thing between the two teams was going to be how England bowled and played spin, and that is the difference between the sides. But I didn't think it would be as full on. I thought India probably scored an extra 15 runs more than what would have been expected on that wicket. But it wouldn't have mattered if they scored 20 runs less than what we expected. England weren't going to get anywhere near that once they lost those early wickets. So this game was over the moment a single ball of Indian spin was delivered, and that was pretty much it. So yeah, it was very one-sided. Unfortunately, we've had two fairly one-sided semi-finals, but to be fair, we've had an incredibly entertaining World Cup so far. So we can't, in terms of close games and everything, can't really complain that the semi-finals were duds when we've had so many other great games.
Indeed, and I was wondering which game you'd be wanting to talk more about, whether it was South Africa Afghanistan game earlier in the day as per Indian timings. Now, that game is as well. Eventually, there was just too little to defend for Afghanistan because, considering what happened in the first two overs, one got tempted to think what if Afghanistan had posted, say, 120 like they did against Bangladesh, or gone further and posted say 130, 140, or what if they had batted second, chased, although their record of course is better in this World Cup when they've set the targets, and we always talking about their brittle middle order that had to be exposed at some stage. But there are what ifs, and South Africa eventually did have it easy, but there were some moments in the match which left you thinking, left you pondering whether Afghanistan had a chance or if it was an absolute mismatch. Were they overwhelmed? Did they celebrate too much? Were the travel issues eventually taking toll on them? Because logistics as well has been an issue in this World Cup, and Afghanistan, with their delayed charter flight, didn't have enough time to rest, recuperate, and emotionally as well. It must have been overwhelming just to make it to the semi-finals and then switch off from there and then create a mark in the semis as well.
I think it would have been hard for any team in the world to make 120 runs on that wicket. I think it's probably the worst pitch we've seen since the South Africa-Sri Lanka game in New York, and maybe the Ireland India game would be the other one, where those wickets were very, very bad. So, yeah, there's not a lot to say about that game. Essentially, we knew that if their openers didn't make a lot of runs, they were going to struggle. The South African lineup had a better bowling lineup for that kind of pitch. And the other thing that I would add to that is that, had they got South Africa 9 for 3, so they had a catch that they didn't appeal for, and they had another catch that they didn't go for. Had they taken those two wickets, it would have been very, very interesting. I still think South Africa would have gone over the line. I don't think South Africa would have chased 85 very comfortably. I certainly think 105 would have been very, very interesting. And it would have been interesting if South Africa had to bat first. And they might have felt themselves in a similar situation of making 105 to 110, which I think they probably could have defended on that wicket. But yeah, there's not much to talk about with that game. It was such a bad pitch. The ICC just have made an absolute mare of their pitches in this World Cup. To have a World Cup semi-final where I think it was the first couple of balls of the second innings where one ran along the ground and one took off. It's unsafe. It's bad for cricket. When no one has any issues with bowlers being on top, but we have problems when the batters don't know if the ball is going to hit them in the knee or hit them in the nipple. You should know the difference between your knee and your nipple, and apparently the ICC no longer know that. So there's not much we can talk about that game. You're right. All those other things that you mentioned before, I'm not saying that they did not play a part, because I think they probably did at times play a small role in where we ended up in this game. But when it came down to it, that wicket was really, really tough, and it suited South Africa a lot more than it suited the Afghanistani bowlers. And by the time Afghanistan worked out what was going on with that wicket, they were almost half out, right? Like it was over by that point, that game. So it's a real shame for cricket again that we can't just get, I don't know, the very basic thing right, which is having a cricket wicket that isn't terrible.
Indeed. And adaptability being key, like we saw in this India England game, because with Afghanistan as well, once they went on to bat, probably they didn't know what would be enough and eventually had to settle for something that was way below par. And there are some questions as well that we'd take in shortly from now. But just to continue that conversation, now, like you mentioned, it is one thing for the bowlers to also come into play, quite another when it's getting dangerous for the batters. At the same spot, when the ball was pitched, you'd see at one point the ball keeping extremely low. At the other point, in the other instance, you'd see it, like you mentioned, whistling through your ears, whistling into your ears. So all of that factored in. How do you see ICC taking those notes and making a difference ahead, particularly on the pitches that have not yet settled down, that are new, like the New York wicket? Obviously, there'd be much brainstorming over that New York wicket because there has been a lot of flag that ICC that has faced over it. But how do you see things changing from here in the light of the observations?
I don't know. They can't find themselves for a bad wicket, which they should have in Trinidad and they should have in New York. So they're in a weird position when it comes to that. I think the bigger problem now is that India and South Africa are probably, well, neither of them have been beaten. Outside of Australia, maybe Australia and South Africa are in roughly similar kind of form. But realistically, India and South Africa are probably at least two of the three best form sides, and India is probably the best form side, have made it through to the final. What would be horrendous would be if we get another bad wicket for Barbados. And it's too late. Like, if that's the case, there's not much we can do now. It's already a bad wicket, and there's nothing they can do between now and Saturday. But yeah, that would be the big issue for me if we get to a point where that final is terrible. The ICC don't take this stuff as seriously as they should. I've been writing about that and talking about that for years, and it's come back to bite them. And I suppose they're lucky that South Africa got through and not Afghanistan, because if Afghanistan got through to the final and were nowhere near good enough to play in that final, it would be an abomination. So at least the better side won. But if that hadn't have happened because of that wicket, ICC would have no one to blame but themselves, and they have no one to blame but themselves. They've had a long time to prepare for this tournament, and they clearly haven't prepared correctly. And we got a terrible, terrible wicket in the semi-final for no reason.
And this wicket had a track record of underwhelming first inning scores. Obviously, there were associate teams playing on that wicket, so one probably didn't get a fair idea. But that fair idea arrived at the biggest of all the spots. Of course, it being the semi-finals, and then of course Afghanistan being exposed, and also that the attack was not suited to the conditions, like you already mentioned. Now, moving on to this India England clash, and there are a lot of comments that are around that clash. We'd talk about the Indian perspective, but this one comment that arrived well in advance, and music and stuff says that should it be the end of Mott's tenure, probably a new look England time, a new look England side the next time they take field in a T20 against Australia in September. Do you think it's too soon? Because as soon as he arrived, he delivered with that World Cup trophy, 2022 edition. Enjoyed a lot of success before with the women's team, but suddenly with the debacle in India, the 50 overs World Cup, and now with the T20 World Cup, they huffed and puffed first to the Super 8s and then to the semis. Convincing win over West Indies and USA, but that close loss against South Africa didn't look that good. Didn't look that good. So all in all, how do you assess Mott's tenure?
I mean, they made the semi-finals and they beat one Test nation, didn't they? Am I right in saying that? I think
Yeah.
that's right. So they've done well to make the semi-final. Australia will be looking back, go, wait a minute, how did we not make the semi-final here? So I think that was certainly an issue. Look, I think the bigger issue isn't Mott. I think the bigger issue is that the last two tournaments have been played in places that help spin bowling, and they don't. Moeen Ali is no longer the player that he once was. Liam Livingstone is a part-time. If Liam Livingstone's bowling well, it's an issue for them because it means the other team is going to have a better spinner who will be harder to hit more often than not. And they don't play spin particularly well. I just think that this team is coming to the end of an era. And so they have to make a decision on Mott based on the fact of, what's the... We got here. We've come up with this idea. It was funny. I did a podcast with Matt Roller just before the 50 over World Cup. And I think it was the book that he wrote with Tim Wigmore. And it's all about the the way that England changed the culture of their cricket, right? They started thinking about white ball cricket differently. And I sort of said to Matt at the end, you have a look at this. There's a few players that are aging out, and the next generation doesn't look as good, right? So Phil Salt was an obvious one that we both liked. Gus Atkinson is perhaps another player that you could look at and go, okay, there's a couple. But this isn't like the 2015 period where you were like, well, all these guys are already great and they're in their peak and they're going to come in. And Matt was like, oh, I don't think they'll drop off all that much and because they've fixed the culture. But they have now, right? The fact that they haven't made the final in the last two tournaments is actually quite a disappointment to them. The fact that they haven't had a lot of good wins in the last two tournaments is going to be a disappointment to them. But it may just be the Asian conditions. But there are a lot of players that are getting on a little bit and they are going to have to make some decisions on them. So if you go back and, we talked about this for Pakistan, and other teams in previous podcasts, they're going to look, I think they're going to look at this and they're going to say to themselves, is Matthew Mott the coach we want to do the rebuild? Or is not the coach that we want to do the rebuild? I don't think there's anything wrong with him. As you said, he won a title early on. There was a lot of talk about how England weren't particularly as dynamic strategically when he was coach, but that's probably more to do with the fact that Jos Buttler is the captain. But they have to make a decision because they didn't hire him to be the coach of a rebuild. They hired him to be a safe pair of hands to continue the reign, and he did, and then it dropped off a cliff, right? And so things have changed. Is he still the right man? And I think that's a valid question that they need to work out.
Strategically, today, comparing how the two teams went about their business, first of all, England didn't use Moeen Ali at all, probably pondering over the fact that they're right-handed batters in the Indian side. At any given point of time, they were right-handed batters. But then, on the other hand, you had Axar walking in, obviously claiming the wicket of Jos Buttler, and then in came Moeen Ali. And Indians weren't deterred. They continued with that matchup, which would have worked in England's favour had Moeen Ali decided to go hammer and tongs rather against Axar. But Axar eventually claimed those wickets and turned the match on its head. So do you think that more of spin could have been deployed, considering the conditions, considering how the Indian spinners thrived on the surface?
I don't think it would have mattered. I don't think it would have changed the result. They bowled 8 overs of spin, which is about what they try and bowl, right? With Moeen Ali, they would have had two guys that they would have been terrified that could have hit him for 10 or 15 runs in an over in a game where they probably thought 10 or 15 runs in an over would be a big difference. In fact, when you look back on it, the Chris Jordan over is so massive in this game for that very reason. So I didn't have a problem with the strategy at all of not using Moeen Ali. Moeen Ali's not bowling particularly well. He's not bowling as well as he used to. They brought him out with the bat. He's floated around the order a few different times. I also think in that kind of chase, they were probably thinking if Moeen Ali comes out and he hits 20 off 12 here, regardless of the matchup, that puts us in a position where we can then, have Brook and Bairstow come in later with more of a cushion. So there's a few different reasons. I didn't have any problem with the strategy. It's just that Akshar Patel bowled really well on a wicket. Put it this way: when we're talking about strategy, and you're talking about a guy who's got a bowling average in Test cricket of like -8 or whatever Akshar's bowling average is, coming on as your second change bowler, and your second best spinner, and your third best spinner, or your third best spinner even is coming on, and Jadeja, however you want to rate them at the moment in T20 cricket between the two of them. And England gave 4 overs to Liam Livingstone. Like, it's not about strategy at a certain point. It's about the fact that they don't have the right players to be able to do that on that surface. And India did. India had multiple options that they could have done. There was no reason for Hardik to bowl today if they didn't want him to bowl at all, right? And even with Arshdeep, they could have given Arshdeep a couple of overs up front, Hardik a couple of overs later, and bowled 12 overs of spin, and they still would have been fine on that surface. They're more suited to those conditions than England are, and that's basically what it comes down to.
Although Dougal Saab believes that rain did help England, but credit to the Indian batters. Now, there's a lot of chatter going on about the Indian batting lineup. You want to comment on that, do you?
Well,
you look very animated.
I don't think it helped them, and I'll tell you the reason it didn't help them. It would have helped them if the minute it started raining, they went off the field. Because if the minute it started raining and they went off the field, Adil Rashid wouldn't have had to bowl with a wet ball for a little while, where he had to skid the ball through. So I actually don't think it ended up helping England. It should have helped England. I think he's right, but it didn't in this particular case. But yeah, sorry. What was your follow-up question?
Multiple questions, actually, not really related to the question on rain, but India's batting lineup. Now, Nag believes that Dubey's entry point should be managed more carefully, potentially when there are spinners deployed by the opponent, and Jaiswal is a better option, and Kohli should be batting at the number three position. Is it too late for it? There was another question on Virat Kohli. I'm just trying to dig it up. Which position Virat Kohli should be batting at?
I just
Should he
don't
be
see why India
opening?
would need to change their team at this stage. So the whole Shivam Dubé thing, I think they got him perfectly today. They assumed England was going to bowl any more spin, which I think was fair because Livingston was left bowling, and so they put themselves into a position where they thought, well, Jadeja's the better option to come out and smash the pace bowling now. And then they lost another wicket, and Shivam Dubé came in, which was fine. I didn't have any issue with that. I think that is actually getting Shivam Dubé correct in that world. Perhaps they could have. When did they lose? Do you remember when they lost the third wicket? So they lost one
India,
wicket in the lost one wicket in the third over. Then
Virat
they lost
Kohli,
another wicket in
10 on
the
10.
sixth over. So if they were going to make it, and then they didn't lose another wicket until the 14th, right? So I suppose they could have brought him in around that time, but they were trying to set up for the death overs hitting at that point as well. So it's a bit of an icky situation. The truth is, the best time to bring him in probably would have been the sixth over, but they had Sky. And so they had a backup. They were absolutely fine. So I don't think there's any issue with the way that they used him today. The only issue that they had with Shivam Dubé today was he made another golden duck, and he's made an incredible habit of making golden ducks of recent times. And that isn't there are a lot of people that will go, oh,
Yeah.
he's out of form. You're not out of form if you're making a golden
He
duck
doesn't
because you
waste
haven't
time.
even started your form.
Absolutely. With Shubham Dubey, he's not been wasting any time, but there are a lot of fans who are lamenting over the fact that looking at Jaiswal in the dugout or Rinku Singh for that matter in the stands cheering for the Indian team, and they're appalled at the fact that Shubham Dubey is out there in the field while obviously he's not even bowling. He got that one over in one of the games, and the two blokes that I just mentioned, they are not a part of the 11. Again, too late for any of those changes to be made. But like we were talking about the batting order earlier, Rakshit has a point here. Virat Kohli opening, obviously. And again, there's a small stat that I want to quote. Across the T20 World Cup editions, Virat Kohli's average, which is just little over 10, is the worst. Now, for a legend of his stature, and I would have understood had this run come in 2022 edition of the World Cup when he was struggling in the IPL, he was struggling overall, and then in the World Cup as well, one wondered what sort of form he'd display. But there he came up with that absolutely legendary knock against Pakistan. Who would forget that? And against England, struggled, scored 50 or 40 deliveries, but was not absolutely out of touch, even subsequently. Now, Rakshit's question is around Virat Kohli targeting long on today by going across with his shots. Do you think there was a mistake on this wicket given how unpredictable the bounce was?
Uh, I don't think that's what got him out. I think Rohit played more across. Rohit played two absolute swipes across the line, one of which rolled along the ground. So this is selective bias where we remember one because he went out and the other one didn't. Going to long on and long off is basically where you hit on Guyana wicket, right? It's trying to hit across line at Georgetown is where you get yourself in trouble. Whereas hitting straight is generally, have a look at where Jofra hit his boundaries towards the end. That ability to hit straight at Guyana usually works pretty well for you. I didn't have a big issue with the way he was playing. He gave himself some room to try and hit down the ground off Reece Topley and just missed it. Sometimes you're going to miss it. That's cricket.
And it's quite an unfamiliar territory that Virat finds himself in because he's always contributed. He's always somebody who thrives at those big occasions. But this time around, it's just not happening. Barring a couple of cameos, he's struggled. What is it to be Virat Kohli at this point? India are doing well. He's absolutely enjoying India's success, and you could see him smiling the brightest as he was heading back to the dressing room. But then just the fact that he's not managed to contribute, he'd be raring to go in the finals for sure.
Yeah, I think he's played enough cricket to know that sometimes you go 7 or 8 games without making any runs, right? They've also played on a lot of dodgy wickets, and he's faced a new ball on them. So that plays a part. He got 24 off 24 in one game, so it's not like he's on a wicket where he was probably trying to play himself back into form a little bit. Look, he hasn't made any runs and has made the final undefeated. I don't really see what the issue is here. If you think that all 11 players should be in form at all time in a league or a tournament, and you've never followed cricket before, right? That's not how these things work. And both of those players, Shivam Dube and Virat Kohli, who've both not been in their best form. I mean, Hardik Pandya wasn't in great form coming into this tournament either, and he's probably vindicated his selection. But the two guys who are not in their best form have played a role. It's just a different kind of role. Shivam Dube has affected the way that spin is being used against India in this tournament because teams are worried about him. And teams are massively keen, to put a lot of effort into Virat Kohli, which is another great thing because it probably takes a little bit of pressure off everyone else. Like, it's just he hasn't made any runs. That's T20 cricket. You can go through any player in T20 cricket's career and they have runs like this. This one just happened to overlap with the World Cup. The thing is that it's going to be overanalyzed. And, on my last show, someone said, should he be dropped? And it's like, he's in the side to play fast bowling. They're about to go up against South Africa. Bringing in Sanju Samson, as that person suggested, is not a like-for-like replacement. And Jaiswal, we all know how well Jaiswal handles pressure. But do you really want to bring Jaiswal in at the moment and get him to play one game in the final? There's no better options here. I would go with Virat Kohli. And this is going to shock you, but in the final, he will either make runs or he won't make runs. And his replacement will either make runs or not make runs. Do you know what I mean? No one can tell you the future, so it would be pointless to try and pretend.
Can there be a like-for-like replacement for Virat Kohli anytime soon? Leave alone the finals of this World Cup.
I mean, it's unlikely.
But the conversations, yeah. We'd obviously ask you later to anoint the possible successors, but that we'd have time for that as well.
We've got months to do that.
But coming to this,
We've got months to do that one.
Months to do that, yeah, or maybe years if he continues across formats. But coming back to again this match and narrowing our attention, Jadeja. Again, there's another player that has been receiving a lot of scrutiny, and that's because of how he's not been his effective best. And Akshar Patel as well, he's been in phenomenal touch. So maybe those comparisons are becoming even more glaring. So why did Jadeja keep bowling fast fuller darts at 100 km/h on a surface? Axar Kuldeep extracted so much bowling better lengths at slower pace. How do you go wicketless on that sort of surface? He's baffled over the fact that he didn't get wickets.
This is why it's hard to be an Indian cricketer. This question.
Okay.
Right? What did India make? 171?
Yeah.
Is that right? 172. Yeah. 171. I was right. Don't correct me when you're wrong. Come on, Megha. 172
the target
was the chase.
Was 72.
Yeah. So that means they went at over 8 runs and over. Correct? We're all happy with that maths? Jadeja's 3 overs went for 16 runs. That's 5.33 runs per over. My guess is, and I'm only guessing here, that Rohit said, just try and keep it tight. Make sure that they fall behind the rate and we'll try and get the wicket to the other end. But the fact that this question exists just shows that you can't do that. You can't play a role in Indian cricket because even if you do, how can you go wicketless on that sort of surface? I mean, many very, very good bowlers have gone wicketless. I mean, Livingston went for what? A run a ball and he went wicketless on this surface. Yeah. So, Arshdeep Singh went wicketless on this surface. Hardik Pandya went wicketless on this surface. Should we drop them all? I just think that you've got to understand what the role is. My guess is that they just said, and I've seen a lot of left arm finger spinners bowl. I think they probably said to Axar, we want you to try and get some spin. And with Jadeja, we just want you to get the run rate up, would be my guess.
Interesting. And considering that they're very similar in what they do, the roles that they play and what they bring to the table, and also factoring in his contributions with the bat. He contributed 17 runs of 9 deliveries. You're better with numbers, so cross-checking with you. In the
I think you're right.
meanwhile,
Wait,
if
wait,
you
wait,
are
wait. No, don't go ahead. He got 17 off 9, correct. He batted for
good
24
heavens,
minutes, by the way. Jeez, he was out there for a long time without facing many balls. Sorry, continue.
didn't get to face enough deliveries. Meanwhile, if you are in the mood to actually criticize any of the Indian players, Jared is not in the mood to let it go. He's going to be severe because he's pretty happy, content with how the Indian team has been faring and how the roles have been distributed and how the players are responding to those roles. Uh, Comus, Comic Seer has an interesting comment. He says every time Dubey gets out, cameraman focuses on Rinku Singh. They know their job. Didn't happen this time, but the previous Dubey outs, they definitely made a point at focusing on Rinku. So there's this chat going on in the comment section, a conversation going
Honestly,
on in the.
yeah, I honestly think it's very unlikely that the producers and the directors would be that up to it. I mean, it could be wrong, but I would find that unlikely. I think it's more likely that they showed the dugout and Rinku Singh's always sitting in the dugout because he doesn't have anything else to do because he's not in the squad, would be my guess. So
Okay.
I could be wrong, but like I know the people who do those jobs. I just find it they don't think about cricket the way that people in this chat think about cricket. Let's put it that way.
But they'd be active on the social media, so you never know. They'd be just updated.
Yeah,
Meanwhile,
but they're
just to
old,
piss you off,
Mega. They're like active on like talking about on Facebook with their friends about some 40th birthday party or 50th birthday party they went
I
to.
hope they're
Don't think.
listening.
I don't think they're looking at memes of Rinku and Dubé. Do you know what I mean? I happy to be
Yeah.
wrong, but I wouldn't think that's the case.
Jared, this one is just to piss you off further,
This one,
in
go
case you
read
want to
it.
respond to it. You want me to read it?
Yeah.
See, these are not my words. I'd still read it. Rakshit says Kohli seems lost in the modern T20 game, especially opening. Now, this was a criticism that was leveled against him. 2022 before that, and there were a lot of innings with a strike rate of 120. Second part of this IPL, I'm not sure if that is still justified. Especially opening, it was always better suited for Jaiswal to open with Rohit and Kohli playing the anchor role if there's a batting collapse. Last T20 World Cup. Last T20 World Cup. You might have to say something on that.
Look, I wouldn't have picked Kohli. Right, I wouldn't have had him on my side, and the reason I wouldn't
Okay.
have had him on my side is because they already had Rohit, and Jaiswal is the future, and if he had a better IPL specifically, I think it would have been very hard. But it was going to be very hard for India not to pick Kohli because Kohli's Kohli, right? And having him on the bench would cause other issues, especially if they had lost the game. So I wouldn't have picked him. And I don't think he's completely followed with modern T20 cricket. I think it was hilarious that he was making fun of stats people for saying he was too slow when he actually started to bat faster. And everyone's like, yeah, if you batted like this all the time, no one would have ever had a go at you. And I say this as a person who spent 3 or 4 days working for RCB once in stats. But look, I think when it comes down to it, if Rohit's going to play the way he does, I don't have any issue with Kohli opening the batting with him. My worry was that Rohit might bat within himself a little bit again, and if that was the case, you can't have two anchors, right? They haven't had two anchors. They've had one guy who's trying to stay in, who hasn't managed to, and the other guy has gone in to whack the ball everywhere. That's a perfectly fine combination. I still probably would have gone in with Jaiswal, right hand, left hand. I think that's one reason why Pant's been batting further up the order, despite the
Yeah.
fact that maybe he's slightly better suited to number 4 and number 5 himself. So maybe that upset it. But yeah, I wouldn't have gone in with this. But they're unbeaten in the final. Like, is this the time to start saying that Kohli's not the right man? I don't know. I would just, it's fascinating to me that this is the conversation, and the conversation isn't how do we beat South Africa. Conversation isn't is this what could go wrong for us in the final. It feels really interesting to me that this is where we are trapped again, and you can see why it is so hard to be an Indian cricketer.
Interesting. Doing a good job balancing it out. There are questions flooding in about the South African game as well. How much time do we have at our disposal? That's a question.
I've got 5 more minutes.
Literally 5 more minutes.
Yep.
So, quick fire. Now, Comics here also mentions that Aiden Markram hasn't lost any finals as a captain. Under 19 World Cup, a 2014 edition, twice in, of course, South Africa 20. And now there's another final that beckons him.
Yeah, I always thought by the time he was 28, 29, he'd be a long-term South African captain. His development's a lot slower than I always thought it would be. I saw him as a very young player, not just under 19 World Cup, but playing senior cricket, and I thought he would be a star. He hasn't quite managed that. I think he's a good captain. I've seen nothing to tell me that he's a genius captain and that he can't lose a final, though. Anyone can lose a final. And yeah, good on him for not losing one so far. If he loses the next one, no one will remember everything that you just wrote there, even if it's correct. That's just how things work.
We'd quickly delete the comment in that case. Now, Suresh has a pertinent point. This Indian team deserves enormous credit for their consistent performances despite all the noise around scheduling and other ICC decisions, including the fact that this particular semi final didn't have a reserve day, although it did have 250 minutes, the same amount of time that was allocated for the first semi finals in case there was a rain interruption. Now, there was a lot of hue and cry on Twitter. A lot of people might not be aware, but Jared, considering how active you are on social media, you must have read most of those comments. You must have gauged what people are thinking across the world, those parts of the world where people actually bother about cricket. Now, there had been interesting opinions floating in. What's your stand on this before I put forth my stand?
So the thing that I think people have got most wrong is there's a lot of Indian fans go, India got their semi-final in Guyana, and so, but that's not an advantage because many other teams have known where their semi-final will be played if they make the next round. And it's like, yeah, those are teams hosting the event. That's why you host the event, so you get to choose where you play your semi-final. It would be ridiculous if when in the 1996 World Cup, if the teams had not been able to host their own semi-finals, right? It just would have been an absolutely ridiculous situation to be in. And we've had it before in cricket. So we've gone out of our way to make sure that when Australia qualified and when New Zealand qualified, they both got the semi-finals. That's fine. This was done purely for commercial reasons. And it wasn't done because a team was hosting. It's a very, very different kind of situation. There's many different problems with that. Lots of teams had lots of issues with scheduling and everything else, and ICC decisions all the way through. I really don't think that would affect the Indian team at all. I'm not being funny here. I cannot imagine that the Indian team, of all the things they had problems with, have a look at the comments, Suresh, of all the people today. You think the Indian team is worried because people are like, oh, they've got a final in Guyana. Like the Indian team is worried about the fact that every time they scratch, their left cheek, someone says they should be dropped. That's the issue for the Indian team, right? So I don't think they deserve any more credit than anyone else did. South Africa, had a weird schedule because they played so much of their cricket on the New York wicket and then had to finally come to the West Indies and played Afghanistan on a pitch that could have gone either way. They played England on a pitch that could have gone either way. So South Africa could have been in all sorts of trouble. India had that bit and Australia had that bit where suddenly, after not playing that much, they suddenly seemed to play a million games in a row. Afghanistan had maybe the worst bit of scheduling at the back end of the tournament. Sri Lanka had the worst bit. Like, what are we talking about? This has been a horrendously organized tournament. And India is just another one of the teams that has been caught up in that. And the noise, what are you talking about? If this wasn't the issue, Suresh, someone would find another issue. We both know that. So let's just ignore that and move on. I just don't think the Indian team deserve any credit for ignoring what happens on social media, because that's what they do anyway most of the time. Certainly when they're at their best, that's what they do. And it's easy to ignore stuff on social media when you're winning. It's really hard to do that when you're losing.
You don't have much time anyway when you're winning because you got to focus on the next game.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Pakistan was also allotted Kolkata, had it obviously finished as a semi-finalist, which Pakistan did not because they crashed out before that. Now, final question about what can be expected from the finals. Now, Jared, will the South African seam attack trouble India the way they troubled Afghanistan amidst very different conditions? Rabada looks like he's hungry and Jansen can pick up early wickets. So can we expect a close final clash?
Yeah, they probably have to take early wickets to beat India. The only other thing that could win them the game is probably Quinton de Kock or Heinrich Klaassen going nuts. So those are the three things that they kind of need to win the game against India. Look, Jansen's bowled some of the best balls in this tournament and some of the worst balls in this tournament. I mean, the Australian and the Bangladesh bowlers must have been looking on just going, oh my God. we bowled much better to Gurbaz and we didn't get him out. And this joker's bowled everywhere and got him to nick straight to slip. So if they can get early wickets, then it's, and we, in the 2019 semi-final and the last ODI World Final, if you get early wickets, they can sometimes kind of slow themselves down. And, you still have to bowl well as Australia and New Zealand did in those games, but they can do that. They can help you in that situation. That's probably the best bet. And the other best bet is that Heinrich Klaasen is a brilliant player of spin. And if he can line up the Indian spinners and hit one of them out of the attack or damage, especially Kuldeep, that can be a real issue for India. But there's a lot more scope for India to find victories than there is South Africa to find victories.
Interesting. Considering that there are a lot of Indian fans in the comment section, and assuming that the ones watching right now and also subsequently would be a lot of Indian fans. So those are some reassuring words from Jarrod. There's an existential question. I'm just putting it in highlight and spotlight just for us to maybe take it months and months down the line. Existential question. A lot of teams are in transition phase. Where do we go from here? Meanwhile, there's another quick question. How can we label this final matchup between South Africa versus India? Can we call it the intent final? Yes or no? And we wrap up.
No,
No.
it's
Oh.
not. And South Africa don't have a lot of intent. They're a par team. They try and score around par and hope that Miller or Stubbs or Klaasen can take them beyond that occasionally. But no, they're not a very intent-led team. Risa Hendricks, certainly not.
There's one for you. All right, then. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. As you read
What?
it.
You want me to read it? That's what?
Yeah.
I can't read that. That's something nice about me. I wouldn't.
That's why.
That's again. Thank you very much, comics here. Look, we've got. If this is your first time, please keep coming back to Cricket 8. Me and Megha do this once a week. Megha does it with Rob Barron as well. Michelle also does some podcasts with us, so it's worth coming over here. We've assembled a really cool little team, and I think me and Rob have got a podcast again tomorrow, probably in about 12 hours time. And Michelle and Rob will probably be talking to you some stage after the final as well. And then Megha will be back on as well. So look, thank you for all of your support. And hopefully we'll certainly be doing podcasts over the next couple of months. And it's been fun. We've only just started. Me and Megha, is this our second episode together?
Yeah.
Yeah, we barely started. You don't even know what an asshole I am yet.
Yeah. Oh, good heavens. But
I love how you said, yeah, then. That is the perfect answer. See, now we have rapport. Now we're building it.
You see Freudian slip there. But in the meanwhile, what I've learned after this is that Jarrod doesn't like compliments. So I'd make sure that we get more of those compliments popping up. Thank you so much for joining. Goodbye. Take care.